Aidan Hart, thanks for joining.
Pleasure, Dan.
You make icon paintings. Could you describe what that is?
Yes, I suppose I'd more accurately describe myself as a liturgical artist because I paint not just panel icons, but do frescoes, mosaic, stone and wood carving. So, liturgical artist, in my tradition, I'm a member of the Orthodox Church, um, would be, as it were, as a door maker. What I mean by that is that I make art, but we tend nowadays to think of art as just me and the painting or me and the sculpture. But in the Orthodox ancient Christian tradition, an icon, and the word means image, the icon is a door, a window, if you like, a reflection of heavenly life. So always we think of three with an icon, myself or the viewer, the image, painted or mosaic, and the saint behind it, as it were. So the icon is an image, which is what the Greek word means, of a saint or Christ or of an angel. So my interest as a praying viewer is not just to admire the work of art, but it's to meet the person it depicts. So that's why traditionally the icon has been called a door. Sometimes a window, but the trouble with the window, you could just look at someone, but you can't hug them, you can't greet them. Whereas the door, you go through it, and then in a sense you forget the door, and then you greet and hug the person on the other side. So ironically, my job is to become redundant. I, I, I make art not so people can admire the art, but so they can go through it, forget what I make, and meet the saint, and I can just disappear.
So, in a sense, your goal is to create a portal for
Yeah,
the
exactly,
viewer. I
exactly.
see, I see. And how did you get into this work?
Yes, I became a Christian when I was 15 and come from a very arty sort of family. So I've always been painting and drawing. And then eventually, having done a degree in English literature and mathematics, I became a sculptor. So I was doing this professionally for 4 or 5 years, and I was aiming to depict something of the spiritual nature of the human person. So I started with trying to understand the human body. So my early influences were people like Auguste Rodin, Michelangelo, in other words, quite naturalistic stuff. I felt wherever I ended up, I had to start with what was visible. And then having, I wouldn't say mastered, but accomplished a certain degree of proficiency in that, I then began to look at other works that were more abstract. So I looked at African work, old Egyptian work, also some modernists like Brancusi, um, Modigliani, people who were more abstract because I felt that their work expressed something of the spirit. So then I went in a more simplified direction. And then after doing that about 2 years, I tried to combine the two together, the inner and the outer, the physical and the spiritual, and came to various conclusions how that can be done. And at that point, I stumbled across two Orthodox monks in New Zealand. I was born in England, but raised in New Zealand. And immediately I saw the icon. One of the monks was an icon painter. I realized, well, that's what I've been looking for, this sort of union of the fiery spirit in someone and their body. So they didn't treat the physical world as something to be discarded. On the other hand, it wasn't merely naturalistic, it wasn't merely um, uh, pure naturalism. It was the body and the spirit combined, like iron and a fire. You put iron in the fire, it begins to glow red hot. So the heat and the iron all mingle together. But you take the iron out and they become separate again. So I was really taken by the art, but also the whole theology, the spirituality behind the icon. That was matter affirming, that acknowledged that matter in the human person is created to be, as it were, aflame with the presence of God.
Hmm.
So that led me to started carving icons. I came back to England and started carving icons in wood, and then learned to paint, and then later on mosaic, etc.
So basically, you were searching for something that was sort of merging your spiritual interests with your interest in the materiality of painting and of art. Um,
Exactly. I
so
always wanted both and, not either or.
yes,
Yeah. So that's why I've not gone into pure naturalism nor into pure abstraction. It's both united. Yeah.
so you grew up in New Zealand, but you
Mhm.
were born in the UK, and you encountered these monks in New Zealand.
Yes. Yeah.
And were you a member of the Orthodox Church at that point?
No, I became Orthodox through the monks. After a brief sojourn in the Baptist church between the age of about 15 and 18, I enjoyed my time there, but I felt something was lacking, and part of it was the affirmation of the material world. It seemed to be so word-based, but I felt, well, beauty is important, that the material body is important. There must be a role for the material world. So I went to what's called a high Anglican church. It had all the smells and bells, as we say. It affirmed the importance of matter in worship. So we had incense and beautiful music, etc. Um, when I was about 25, I came across the Orthodox Church and became Orthodox. And I wanted to explore the monastic life. And so the monks in New Zealand suggested that I go around the world a bit and visit different monasteries before deciding where to try and test the monastic life.
So where did you ordain then?
Sorry?
Where did you ordain? It,
But we don't use the word ordained for
ah,
monasticism. I started testing the monastic life in Wales with an old Welsh Orthodox monk. So I was there about 3.5 years. And then land was bought for me to live as a hermit. But before settling there, my archbishop sent me to Mount Athos. Have you heard of Mount Athos?
looking into your life's work. I was researching, doing a little research on you, and I encountered this. It's a place in Greece that's one of the. It's a very well known spiritual Christian center, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
There's a famous monastery there. Is that right?
Yeah, the 20 monasteries there. It's a whole peninsula, which is a monastic republic. Monks are the only permanent residents there. They
Ah,
can't pilgrims go. At the moment, there are over 2,000 monastics there. Most live in community monasteries, of which there are 20. And then there are what are called skeets. Skeets are like villages, really. There are 7 of those. And then they're hermitages. So these are hermits who live by themselves. So you've got the whole range of Orthodox monastic types of ways of living there. And I was in one of those monasteries called a Aidan monastery. It was part of my training before becoming a hermit back in England.
so how long were you in the monastery for?
In my first stay there, about a year and a half, and then every year when I was living back as a hermit in England, I went back for a month. So about 2 years altogether.
And then how long were you a hermit after? So after that, you went back to England, and
Yeah, about 7 years, I think, 6.5 years, something like
so
that.
how did that work? You're living alone,
Yeah, I'm
right?
living alone, but what happens when you hear there's a monk living on a hill? You want to visit him. So it's a pretty exhausting life. But I tell people, if you want a quiet life, don't be a hermit.
Receiving visitors.
Oh,
Interesting how that works, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, which is one of the reasons why, with the blessing of my bishop, I left in the end to concentrate on what I say praying with color, because icon painting is a work of prayer. You're praying with stuff rather than with words. I mean, obviously, you're in your heart, you're praying as well, as best as one can. But yeah, it's just too demanding. Really. I love people. I learned so much from all the pilgrims who came, but it was really a job for 4 people because I had to support myself for my iconography. So I had those commissions. You're in church about 4 hours a day. Um, all the guests coming, they could be catered for. And then it's 20 acres of land that I was restoring the building. So that was almost a full-time job.
So you had to take care
So
of the land as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And during that time, you were painting.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And also, as I said, quite a bit of the time was, especially in the beginning, restoring the buildings. I converted half the barn into a chapel, so I frescoed that, um, and then converted some of the ruined buildings into usable buildings, etc. So yeah, there was work on the land, but I supported myself for my commissioned work, so I had to keep up with that. Mainly painted panel icons, but some carving as well.
When you decided to go back to lay life, would you call it that? I suppose I should clarify that I'm more familiar with terms as for monks as it pertains to Buddhist monks because I have
Yes.
just more research into that. I've seen met more Buddhist monks, but I'm curious about the terms and how do you call it disrobing when you leave, or is it
Yeah,
not as
there are different stages. I listened to one of your podcasts, an interview with a Buddhist monk. Yeah, so like that, you become a novice. So I was a novice. And then the next stage might be wearing a garment, but you no vows or anything. I suppose that's like a novice. And then the Rasifor stage, where you wear a robe, but you haven't taken vows yet. Um, and then you become what's called a schema monk. A schema is the name for a particular robe. Um, so Rasifor monk depends on the tradition. It's a bit like engagement. You expect to get married, but you're not yet married. So
Mm.
I was in the Rasifor stage. I was that for 12 years, which is a long time, but it was just circumstances, I suppose. So that wasn't ideal to leave as a Rasifor monk. You can with the blessing of your bishop, which I received. Um, yeah, it was hard for me because I loved the monastic life, but it was just too much for one person to do all these things, and I felt that ironically I had to simplify my life. So returning to the world and just concentrating on um, as it were, creating beauty and praying with beauty. And I actually have more quiet now. I'm 8 hours a day in my cell. My studio is like my monastic cell. And I have an apprentice here from New Zealand, Mark, and we don't talk much. We're just there working. Sometimes we're listening to podcasts while we're painting, but yeah, it's all part of that learning the faith. Sometimes you're just designing in quiet or painting in quiet, but just generally, it's just a more, for me personally, it's a quieter life.
So painting, that's ironic. It's ironic that you have a quieter life now than when you were a hermit.
Mhm.
That's interesting. So
I'm
that
married with children, so in that sense, when you get home, you've got all the
right.
demands of there. But yeah, I mean, at the Hermitage, I deliberately chose a place that was difficult of access. You got to drive or walk probably like 3/4 of a mile through a muddy farm track. If it's winter, it's muddy. So it's not easy to get to, but still people came, which is okay in Orthodox monasticism. We receive people as angels, that though we're praying with God, every person who comes as an icon of God, made in God's image, and but they bring Christ to you. Um, but in a big monastery, you would have people looking after the guests, and another person would be cooking, another person making the beds, another person talking with them, etc. But as a hermit, you've got to do all those things.
So you would have people stay the night. You
Yeah,
had a
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You got day visitors, you got people staying for a week, some people staying the night, but it just depended really.
So was
Yeah,
what you mentioned you have two children? Is that right?
yeah,
Or was that on and you have a partner, you have a wife.
yeah.
Was that part of your leaving the monastic order?
No, no, I think I probably made either to I never intended to live as a hermit, really. I really wanted and expected to be living in a monastic community. It's just the one big monastery in England that I asked to join, and they didn't have space. Orthodox monasticism was sort of flourishing at the moment. So I think also it was probably a better decision for me rather than being a hermit. When you're a hermit, you're exposed to a lot of temptations. So I decided probably it was better if I was going to go into the world to be married rather than being by myself.
That makes sense. So would you say painting for you is a devotional act? It's
Oh,
an act
definitely.
of prayer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And also I've had a very strong missionary sense, and not in the sense of bashing people about the air, but um, a lot of people I've found who say they don't believe in God. I don't believe in the God they don't believe in either. What
Mm.
I mean is that they have a caricature of God, and God's a spoil sport, or he's always trying to ruin your fun, or telling you to do things you don't want to do. That life with God does demand obedience to him, but that word obedience is interesting. It means in Greek, because I studied Greek, means to listen intently, to listen intently. So instead of it being a restriction, obedience to God is expanding, like I have an apprentice here. So hopefully I know a bit more than him about iconography. I've been doing it for 40 years. So when he comes to me as an apprentice, it's not so I can make him smaller and constrict him. He's obedient, inverting commas, to me, but he wants to expand. So I'm interested in drawing people closer to Christ through beauty, because I think making beautiful things, which are part of the whole worship of the church, my icons and mosaics are part of a larger, what you might call a sacred dance. The liturgy, church services, is like a big sacred drama, really, with the drama, stage performance. You've got your actors, you've got the stage set, you've got your music, you've got your lighting. it's a holistic approach. So what I make is part of a larger drama. And I just really want to show that life with God, though it's hard and you've got to be willing to die for Christ, nonetheless, it's a movement toward beauty and becoming beautiful. So yes, so making iconography for me is a devotional act. It's praying with color or with stone, whatever I'm working with. But also it's a way of trying to correct this imbalance of how people see Christ and life with God.
What do you think the relationship is between beauty and truth?
Very good question. I've been listening and reading works by Timothy Petitsas, an American theologian and writer. And one of his mottos, if one could call it that, is beauty first. So I've been thinking a lot about this. And I think, obviously, beauty and truth are twins. But what strikes me about beauty is that beauty is an experience, isn't it? If you say something's beautiful, it means that it's touched your soul. You've been changed by it. It's an encounter. I can't say something is beautiful unless I've encountered it. And of course, truth has that element as well. You know, when you hear something that's true, hopefully it's like a homecoming. It has a certain beauty to it. But something can only be beautiful because it's true, because it's authentic. So in that sense, you can hardly distinguish them. But I think, to my mind, the dominant feature of beauty is that it's truth experienced. Um,
Mm.
there is a false beauty, but it's not really false. It's like I don't know. Like you can get someone all dressed up and looking really pretty, but they live a completely dissolute life. They're a thief and a liar and all that. But still, they are beautiful. Their face is beautiful. So it's not a false beauty. It's just that they haven't
It's a shallow
become.
beauty, right?
Yeah, it's a shallow beauty, or they're shallow. They've got a beauty because God gave them a beautiful face, but they're not living in a beautiful way. So they haven't continued, as it were, through the whole being, that beauty that they have. So in that sense, there isn't a false beauty. It's just a misdirection of beauty. And I don't believe that anything is bad in itself. It's only a misdirection of it. It's a misuse of it. Um, I mean, I could say something to someone that's true, but if it's in the wrong time for them or said in the wrong way, it can really harm them. And a counselor
Mm.
does this. They don't sort of, even though they can clearly see what the person needs to do, you know, they're an alcoholic, they'll just stop drinking then. You can't just tell an alcoholic stop drinking. You've got to sort of create an environment that it's easy for them. But just to tell them straight off in the wrong way or the wrong time can be really destructive. So that's a matter of saying something that's true, but in the right way. In fact, one of the Greek words for beautiful is aureos, which means at the right time. Aureos, ora means time. So if a flower buds too early, the frost will destroy it and it won't be able to become a seed, won't be fertilized to become a seed. So it's a beautiful flower, but if it opens at the wrong time, it's not beautiful, it gets destroyed. So there are a
I,
lot of aspects to beauty.
so it's really not just timing, but also context, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and we really see things through the lens of the context of the culture that we're in,
yeah.
of the framework of our own mental framework, where we're at. And we do. I was listening to a Dharma talk, and one monk was saying that we meet people where we are,
Mhm.
and I think
Yeah.
that's true in terms of art as well.
Though I do think that there are timeless principles as well. I don't believe that something that's true in one culture can be completely false in the other. I mean, there are like color, yellow might mean one thing in one country and the opposite in another, and that's arbitrary. But I don't believe in this modernist idea that there aren't any ultimate truths. I believe that there are. But the expression of those truths would actually vary from place to place, culture to culture, context to context.
What would be an example of an ultimate truth that you can think of?
Um, in the book of Genesis, in the first book of the Bible, it says that God made us in his image. So, an ultimate truth is that everyone is made in the image of God, even if they're acting wrongly, even if they're acting against that. So that means I need to love and respect everyone, even a murderer. I don't respect what they've done, but to me, an ultimate truth is everyone has got to be treated with profound love and respect. How you express that love will depend on how you can help them. Obviously, the way I relate to a murderer will be different from how I relate to a saint. But I would regard equally both as this is in God's likeness. So it's interesting that in Genesis, God says, let us make man in our image. And he says he created him in his image and likeness. And a lot of the church fathers have said our imageness to God is given by God, but likeness to God is something that we need to achieve. That's inverted commas. It's our choice whether or not we become God-like. In other words, whether or not we act with love and kindness and goodness. So a second truth I would say is that to be truly human is always to be in relationship, because in the Christian tradition, God is Trinity. God is three, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So when God said, let us make man, the human person, in our image, to be in God's image, therefore, must be in relationship, because God himself is just not a single entity. God is a community, if you like, a communality of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I think this is important in our age where we're so individualistic. I can see Dan Gratz as a potential threat to my individuality, or I could see Dan Gratz as a means of me growing in likeness to God because I'm in communion with you. And in Greek and in Latin, the word for person means face. They're identical. Close upon means face. So I have a face to see you now. I have ears to hear you, to communicate. I have lips to communicate with you. So I think that's another really ultimate truth, that we're fulfilled in relationship. Therefore, this element of sacrifice, the element of listening, the absence of ego. On the other hand, I've got to love you as Aidan Hart, not to try to be someone I'm not. So there is that authenticity involved. So everything begins to sort of have its place. So to become myself, I need Dan. I need to meet God in you now, this minute. On the other hand, I don't think, oh, there's Dan, he knows everything. I'll just do exactly what he tells me to do, and I've got no thoughts myself. That would be denying my uniqueness. So it's always both and.
So how did your work change when you took up monastic life?
Well, I'd been an active member of the Orthodox Church for 3 years before I started living the monastic life. So it wasn't really a change, because in the Orthodox Church, lay people live a semi-monastic life in the sense that there's a cycle of prayer and of fasting and feasting, for example. So a lay person will generally fast. Wednesdays and Fridays, for example, would be vegan. The 40 days leading up to Christmas would be more as vegan. The time leading up to Easter be vegan. So there's not a big gap between the way a devout layperson in the world will be living and the way a monastic would be living. But probably a more pertinent question would be, how did my work change when I became Orthodox? I think, as I mentioned, I've been trying in my art to already depict something of the spiritual nature of the human person. But here I was working within a tradition, this tradition. Actually, I'd reinvented the wheel without knowing about the wheel having been around for centuries or thousands of years. So I was just living within a tradition. I could refine the wheel that I'd started to make before.
I'm interested. I'm quite interested in that. So, like, in your work, how do you? I was wondering how you come up with designs. What things are sort of like? Is there a structure already, a framework? And so it sounds like from what you just said, you were sort of already getting at some of these sort of structures and designs independently. Do you think there's something when you become interested in the spiritual realm that this sort of bleeds into your aesthetic sort of choices?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Just naturally.
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we are called to grow into God's likeness. So a saint is someone who's not as a good person, like a Renaissance person. He's a good person who's full of the Holy Spirit. So always when you're painting a saint, you're painting a human who's also a God bearer. A theophorus is the Greek word for it. So all the time you're sort of uniting light and flesh, if you know what I mean, light being a symbol of divinity. So that leads to a certain abstract quality. And the word abstract means to draw out. We tend to think of abstract as departure from reality, don't we? But in
Yes.
fact, the original meaning is to draw out and manifest what's there. The icon tradition does this in many different ways. So the tradition isn't a matter of being a glorified photocopier, just sort of copying everything that's there. It's like a rich dictionary when you're writing, you need the right word for the right sentence, but there are 5 words you could use to express the same thing. So the icon tradition is like a treasure house to help you to express this, what's called the transfigured state of the human person, or the transfigured state of a tree or a rock. So a practical way I might design an icon, I often asked to do icons of British saints for whom there aren't any icons. So I've got to make the first one. So a common process might be to read the life of the saint, and then I might jot down characteristic features of him or her. There might be a great teacher or a great missionary or a great ascetic or whatever. And obviously I'd look for any images of them that exist, but most of the images of these saints are sort of Victorian ones, so a bit sentimental really, so they're not much help. I'd research what sort of garments they may have worn, or what sort of tonsure they had, what sort of way their hair was cut. If they're monastic, there'd be particular tonsure. So that's the sort of the physical part. But then let's just say they're particularly known for their ascetic life. They're great fasters and very wise. So you might have slightly sunken cheeks if they're fasters. Or if they're very wise, I might have a more exposed forehead, and so on. So one then tries to find physical ways of indicating their dominant spiritual characteristics. And you can draw on the tradition for this, how I might look at other icons of ascetics and draw ideas from them, said Isaac the Syrian or said Ephraim or someone like that.
So now, in terms of the design, the structure itself of the work, it seems like when you see um, a lot of liturgical art, there's a lot of similarities and commonalities. Of course, you see like a certain kind of design, a certain kind of way of painting, a certain kind of flatness, perhaps, and there is very much a Byzantine sort of quality to a lot of the icon paintings that you see, right? Is there a way that is there a grid first, like on a physical, just on a material level? How might you start?
Yeah, not all painters work like this, but I think there are basic geometrical principles that help create something with harmony. For example, if it's a bust or half a figure, I would generally have the figure 3 heads high. So if it was sort of just 2 heads high, then you'd be chopped, there'd be no arms to see, and the arms can express a lot. If it were 4 heads high, you have the arms below the elbow, a lot of space that doesn't do anything, be sort of vacant space. So this idea of 3 heads high is quite good for a bust. Um, uh, Often, if it's a festal icon, that means of an event in Christ's life, a feast. Um, Quite often, I'd have a 2 to 3 orientation. So the bottom part would be a square, and the top third might have a semicircle. You wouldn't see the semicircle, but I might arrange it, the icon, so that you've got the divinity or heaven represented by the semicircle, and the square, having 4 sides, might represent the created world. So if it were the nativity icon, for example, I might have Christ who's God become man in the middle of the circle at the top, but also he'll be the middle and the top of the square. So he's human and he's God at the same time. And all the other elements, like the angels, the magi, the shepherds, etc., might be roughly around the circle of which Christ is the center. So this helps to give an aesthetic harmony and order to it without it being too rigid. At the same time, also reflects the profound theological truths that are expressed in the hymns we would sing at Christmas time. So the word, theology, the image, aesthetics all sort of come together.
So it seems like there's quite a deliberate. Every sort of choice that's made is pretty deliberate.
Yes and no. I mean, it's not a mechanical thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd say combination, really. There are some things that are deliberate. Other things are just aesthetically right. You don't theologize about it. These two colors work well together, so you choose them. You don't have to write a theological doctorate about, what this color symbolizes. Um, so a lot of it is just what's beautiful. And there are many different traditions within the Orthodox tradition, capital T. So the Georgian iconography is very distinct. Often the eyes will be quite a bit above halfway in the face. Some traditions simplify garments, some model them more. Even within the Byzantine tradition, when you experience, you can tell within 50 years when an icon was painted, because within that there's a lot of variety. Even within Russia, you can probably identify 6 different schools of iconography. The Moscow school is different from the Novgorodian school, etc. So there is diversity, but as you've suggested, there's also unity. It's the same language because you're expressing the whole cosmos transfigured. We're depicting the same reality. But obviously, if you see an event and I see the same event and we're asked to write about it, you'll have a slightly different twist on it because you saw slightly different things or you emphasize different things, but we're describing the same reality.
Mm. I like that. It seems like there's a lot of freedom in that, and it's like you have this structure, and so now you're free to you understand what the structure will be, you understand what the sort of the source, the material is going to be,
Mhm.
and now you have a lot of freedom to play with all these sort of variables within that structure. So it seems kind of
Exactly.
liberating in a sense.
It is. Yeah, we tend to think of liberty nowadays and freedom as doing whatever you want to do. And before, as a sculptor, I could do that. And there's an initial frisson with that. But after a while, you realize actually, I'm a man chained to my own ankle. I'm free to
Yeah.
go on a yet I'm chained to myself. And that's a terrible slavery. Whereas when I'm working in a tradition which is so much vaster than myself, so much wiser than myself, so much more experienced than myself, even though I'm only 67 years old, I'm actually 2,000 years old because I'm working as an artist within this accumulated wisdom. So I don't see it as a threat. It goes back to this idea of person. A person is fulfilled from relationship.
The
If I'm an
ego, right?
individual person, then that tradition is a threat to me. It's telling me to restrict myself. Oh, horrible. But in reality, it expands me, it frees me.
Kant supposedly said that anxiety was the dizziness of freedom.
Ah,
But I think it's freedom in the modern context, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
There's a lot of a peace as well in that, and then knowing that it's not really about you. You're not creating this thing to support the ego. You're a part of this much longer and much richer, much very rich tradition that transcends the individual.
exactly. Yeah. And ironically, you then become your true self then. It's interesting that in the last book of the Bible, Christ says that he who overcomes, I'll give him a name. And elsewhere it says, and that name is written on the forehead. Now, I can't read a name written on my own forehead, not with, apart from the modern mirrors. You've got to reveal to me what my name is. So by serving, you find your own name. By losing yourself, you find yourself. In fact, traditionally, people don't sign their icon. So once I painted it and it's been sent off, yeah, I disappear then. I've got a signature on it. I'm not important. It's the fact that I can see someone getting closer to Christ through my icon, that's sufficient.
I'm interested in some of the materials you're using. Fresco. The first time we were going to chat, you were gilding that day, so maybe you could tell me what that is.
Yeah. So see if I've got well you can't yeah, you could see but others can't. So there are many different types of icon, but most people tend to think of a panel icon, which is painted with egg tempera. Normally, egg tempera is egg yolk mixed with pigments, ideally natural. But before you paint, you normally would gild. So the two ways of applying gold, one is to just stick it on, it's called oil gilding. The more complicated method, which is the one that I was about to do when we talked, was called water gilding. So um, you have your wooden panel and you put about 20 layers of white gesso on and sand that with about 8 grades of sandpaper till it's really, really smooth. And when you're going to gild, you put about another 8 layers of what's called bole, which is red clay mixed with rabbit skin glue. Sand that with about 7 grades of sandpaper till it's really shiny. And then I'm simplifying a bit here, but then you've got your gold leaf attached to what's called a gold tip, which is like a brush. You put water and alcohol down, then you put your gold down and keep doing that. The idea of the water and the alcohol is that it softens the bowl a bit, which is clay. So having laid the gold on a slightly softened bowl, at the right time, and the timing is critical, you polish the gold with a hard stone called an agate burnisher. And the timing is critical because if you do it too soon, the bowl's too soft and you'll tear the gold. If you wait too long, the bowl's gone hard and you'll scratch the gold. So it's quite demanding work, but you end up with a shiny surface. Um, and these sorts of icons are particularly good in churches which don't have electrical lighting. You just got natural lighting from candles and oil lamps. So And of course, the flame moves, doesn't it? Unlike
Yes.
electrical light. So everything dances. You get people moving in a church service, the deacons, the priests, people coming and going, but the light is also moving. If it's natural light, obviously man makes oil lamps, but natural as compared to electrical light.
It's really a living thing in that
It is.
sense. When it's not just it's not just a finished product. It's you're seeing it still alive then when it's being lit by these candles in the church. It reminds me of that Duccio painting in the Met, and I'm not sure if you've seen that little Duccio in New York,
Yeah,
the Mother
yeah,
and the Madonna and Child. You can see the underneath where the candles had burned the bottom of it, and it's just such a beautiful little piece, and there's such a quiet just a power in it.
yeah.
And I wonder about that. It's a subtle kind of power, but it's really there. It's almost like it's you can see how it's sort of been embedded into the piece, like this energy. And I wonder if you feel that when you make work, if you're embedding this sort of the prayer and the energy and these sort of this kind of consciousness into your work.
Yes, I do believe in the capacity of matter to participate in divine grace, a bit like a stone. The stone in itself is quite cold, but you put it in the sun and it warms up. And when the sun sets, it gives off that warmth. It's absorbed something of that warmth. Um, and also, an icon only begins its life when you finish painting it. That's only the beginning. So, on a feast day, for example, let's just say it's Christmas. The icon of Christmas, the nativity icon, will be brought out and put on what's called an analoy, which is like a stand. And people coming to church would kiss that. We bow down and cross ourselves and kiss it by way of venerating, we're not worshipping the icon, we're worshipping Christ depicted on the icon. And then you might have a procession where it's carried around. When it's not the feast, it will be hung on the wall. And as you say, there might be an oil lamp in front of it, might get burnt. People might put candles in front of the candle falls, but that's its life. It's there to be used and literally loved to bits. So all that prayer offered in front of the icon after it's painted, all that, as it were, gives that icon. It's not magic, but somehow in some mysterious way, it gives that icon a certain grace, a certain warmth to it. And you can sense going into an ancient church, even if there's no service, you feel there's a presence here. You know, the stones, Christ said, if these children didn't cry out and praise me, the stones themselves would praise me. The stones would praise the one who made them.
So it's not really about it's not just the artist sort of imbuing this object with a kind of power or grace, as you say. It's really the community. It's the people that look at the piece and they really activate it. Like the viewers activating it as well. And
I mean, a door's useless unless people use it. Yeah.
I love that. I really enjoy the way you think about process in that. Like I've been really sort of thinking in my mind um, of product versus process and how can you sort of merge the two. And so in the world in sort of contemporary art world, it really is very product oriented, you know. And I don't want to say it's infected, but it has influenced the way that work is made in the for most of the world. Like even myself, I try to think of how can I it's really like how can I just love the process and not really be attached to the product, you know. But it's interesting, I'm hearing that it's like it's both in
Oh,
this,
yeah.
right?
That's right. I've written quite a bit about this, that I've always been interested in ecology or just love God's creation. I was raised, as I said, in New Zealand and spent a lot of my time in trees, building tree huts, playing in nature, swimming. So I always found that the process of making an icon or carving a stone icon, whatever, is itself an ecological act. It's a priestly act. One tradition, not only I think in Christianity, but in a lot of other religions, is that man's proper relationship with the world is to be a prophet, a priest, and a royal artist, let's say. So a prophet listens to God's voice through the created world. So when I'm using a pigment, each pigment has a different voice. Like, for example, terra vert, a green earth, is quite translucent. So if I try to force that to be opaque, it kicks back, something goes wrong, it'll peel off in the end. Others, like cinnabar, is very different. So I've got to first have a relationship with the raw materials and bring out their potential, but not do something that is not in accordance with its nature. And then a priest give thanks to God offers things. So the whole process of making an icon is a bit like a poet who takes words from the dictionary from the English language. And each word is nice in itself, but I try to raise those to a high level by making hopefully a beautiful poem from them. So the act of making an icon is in the Christian Eucharist, we don't give God wheat and grapes, we give him bread and wine. So what we offer is a result of a process, of taking wheat and grinding it up, and the arduous process of making bread, and likewise with wine is craft in making wine. So the act of making an icon is like a microcosm of how we to treat the whole creation, not to stand back and look at it, nor to abuse it, but to transform it, to make it even more articulate. And so that's where the kingly or the queenly role comes in. I think of our kingship in creation, not to dominate it and not to push it down, but to rule with love and goodness, like a parent rules, inverted commas, their children, to make them into good people, not to let them become selfish, to train them in goodness and kindness. So yeah, the process to me is just so vital. It's one reason why I do it, because it seems to summarize, capitulate how I ought to live in the whole world. I do both very badly, but I know that's sort of what I should be trying to do.
So it seems like that your whole life is the project, right? Your whole
Oh yeah,
life is the art.
yeah, oh, definitely. And the great iconographers, some of whom were canonized, like Saint Andrei Rublev, the great Russian iconographer, we canonized him. We know very little about his life, but the one thing that was written about him by a contemporary was that he was very meek, very meek. And this quietness of heart, I think, and clarity of vision, this purity of heart, allowed him to see, as it were, this fire within the bush. Remember that story of Moses who sees the bush that's burning without being consumed. So it's as though the meekness of St. Andrei Rublev allowed him to see things that most of us can't see. So when he painted with skill, you really feel this sweetness, as it were, this divine sweetness in his work. So the greatest iconographers are saints and highly skilled. You can have either skill or saintliness, but to be a good iconographer, they both need to go together.
Like two wings of a bird, perhaps.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know some saints in my own life. Saint Paisius, a really saintly man, but yeah, he couldn't paint icons. But whereas you get really skilled people who are full of ego, and they're not going to paint good icons. So you need to try to get both together.
It's
Yeah.
balance. I think everything in life too, and having a strong creative practice has to be balanced. Like I think it really we do, like, everything you do in your life feeds into your art, and your art feeds into your life. There's not really a separation
No.
between one thing and the next thing, and it's so easy to have a hierarchy and say I want to be doing this more, I like this better, to have a preference. And I think a lot of the training then in at least Buddhist monastics as well is to not have a preference.
Mm. That's it, yeah. And I think that's the tragedy of the situation that modern artists are born into, is that art no longer plays a ritual function. So they're left with themselves. The only thing you can do is paint egotistically, really. Whereas, say, a Buddhist a maker of a Buddhist art, it's a definite role for that Buddhist art, whatever it is. There's room for their creativity. Um, Christian art, all art really, I would say, until um, probably the 19th century was made with some ritual function involved. Even in the Renaissance period, the humanist period, most of the works there had a function. Even the portraits in, say, Rembrandt's time, it's sort of like an icon of a rich patron or whatever. But nowadays, the artist is supposed to be everything, and the art critic has got to almost invent a ritual after the event. Someone creates a bit of rubbish, and then the art critics have got to sort of create a whole sort of theology to support this one individual bit of work, and they'll write all sorts of fancy, highfalutin stuff. And you go, oh, come on, you're trying to squeeze water out of a stone. So it's a really hard time to be an artist because we have removed art from this larger liturgical function. I'm not saying that all artists are like that. The best of them, I think. I don't know, might create works of compassion. I love the work of Alberto Giacometti. He shows something of the loneliness of the modern man, but he doesn't then laugh at modern man. He doesn't laugh about loneliness. He depicts it with compassion. Um, Whereas, to my mind, Francis Bacon, even though he's a great painter, he's almost sort of glories in man's suffering, and it's almost demonic, really. So great, technically a great artist, but um, there's no sort of hope in it. One could say it's cathartic, I don't know, but we had a really difficult time for art for that reason.
I think especially now more and more because the culture it's so rapid. You have social media and that's influencing things, and so there's really an emphasis more and more on this kind of consumption of rapid consumption, and so I think it's difficult. People post something on Instagram or other social media, and if they don't get 100 likes, then it's no good, and that influences how they make the next piece and how they, even if they make art at all, or if they think, oh, I'm not doing it anymore, I wasn't getting the kind of feedback or whatever it is. I think it it's sort of like the way the culture is. There's less patience, and I think functionality has a role in that, right?
That's it. Yeah, I think fame has become our new religion. If someone's an actor and they're known by 5 million people, does that give them the right to start pontificating about life? Um, but we tend to have a lot of famous people given a platform to pontificate about life, and it's only because they're famous that they're given this authority. Well, someone said that the headline of one day becomes the wrapper for fish and chips the next day. Yeah, fame
Yeah.
is a very, very delicate thing, and it comes and goes. So yeah, I suppose it's an inversion of this idea of personhood. But personhood is fulfilled in relationship. Um, but if there isn't a belief in God, then this desire to be in a relationship ends up being, I just want to be affirmed. I want lots of people to look at my video. Um, but you're not really asking, well, why are they looking at my video? Is there any substance to my video? Am I doing it just to get affirmed? So it's tragically lonely, really. Um, if one ought to do what one does because it's right, not because 1,000 people pat me on the back for doing it. So this idea of there's no ultimate right and wrong, I think this leaves us to basically saying fame is the ultimate right. If lots of people affirm me and like my video, it must be good. Well, it might just be that it's a bit shocking, or it's titillated someone for 5 seconds because it's a bit unusual, a bit weird. But that will last for a few seconds, then we'll go on to the next titillation, the next sort of original thing. The word of original is very interesting. We tend to think of original as completely different, but in fact, the word original means to go back to the origin of things, to the timeless things. You and I can discover the same timeless principle, but you would express it in your own unique Dan way. But people seeing your work and my work would recognize, actually, they both go back to the same origin. So there's a distinction, but a unity between them. So true originality, it's got a humility to it. It has something sublime about it. It's coming back home because we recognize the truth of that original work, because being in God's image, we all sort of resonate with truth deep down. So I think it's tragic that we've mistaken all these words and inverted them. Originality now means unlike anything else, rather than the opposite. And
That's really good.
abstract, really, truly abstract art. And the early 20th century abstractionists all said, people like Kandinsky and Brancusi said that they're idiots who call my work abstract in the sense of unlike reality. He said, what I give you is truth. What I give you is the reality of a bird in space. Kandinsky, the same, his work is spiritual and art. So that's another word we've debased. Abstract isn't to depart from reality, it's to manifest the fire within things.
I appreciate that what you say about originality. It recalls the concept original mind to me in Buddhism. It's like it's getting, and there's a lot of confusion about what that is and what that means, but it seems to be all the obfuscation is sort of taken away in that moment, and the original mind is like the child mind. It's like it's an experience in which I've done a couple silent retreats, and I don't know if I quite experienced that necessarily, but I kind of got that sense where you're not. It's like where you're not really anticipating anything. You're seeing things very clearly without the lens of how you think it should be.
Yes, I've had some of those experiences as well when I was a hermit praying the Jesus prayer, and Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon me. It's just, it might have just happened in a few seconds, but eternity was in that few seconds. It, I really felt the presence of God, and I sort of had disappeared, as it were, that his presence was so great that I wasn't there. But then I realized at the same time, and it was more of a spiritual realization rather than thinking it. I realized, well, to see God, not that I had any vision, but to experience God, I had to exist. So I realized that on the one hand, I had to exist to experience God. On the other hand, looking at God, I sort of forgot myself. So it's this sort of ecstasy and ecstasy all combined. And often these things happen from behind, don't they? We got to get ourselves in the right place. Like you had to go on this retreat, you had to do something. But it's not like climbing a mountain. You've got to do a bit of climbing. When you're at the top, all you can do is wait. And if God wills, he comes to us. But we can't keep climbing up to heaven. We can do so much. That's why in a lot of religions, God is experienced on mountaintops. So we do as much as we can. But when you get to the top of the mountain, you can't do anything more unless you've got wings.
You just
You know?
observe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we sort of worn out our created energies, haven't we? We've done what we can. We can't do any more. So that's humility. I mean, okay, I've done my bit. I'm exhausted now. I can't climb any higher. And God says, okay, that's good. You're ready now. Your ego has worn itself out. Now I'll come to you.
That's good. I think there are a lot of more. It seems like there are a lot more in common that monks of Christian monks, Buddhist monks, and probably any other monks of various denominations, various religions have more in common with each other than they do with lay people of their respective traditions.
Yeah, I think it's important to affirm what is in common and also what is different. I remember when I was in Bath, in a parish there, friends of mine were Buddhists, and their sort of Buddhist teacher, who was from in the Thai tradition, he was going to visit and they invited me for a meal with them. So I asked my priest, as a fairly young Orthodox Christian, how I should approach Buddhism. And he said, well, it's a very good pre-incarnational way. What he meant by that was before God became flesh in Christ, it's better not to sort of try to invent images of God. It's better just to concentrate on what you can know, which is yourself. So I think what he said was that Buddhism is not a religion, isn't it? Is it? There's no sort of talk of God. So that just leaves you with yourself. So it's just a form of practice properly, self-knowledge, how to deal with the ego, all these things. So in that sense, it's very different from Christianity because in Christianity, it culminates in a living relationship with a living God. On the other hand, Buddhism has that sort of ascetic practice of stilling the mind, how to deal with anxiety, how to stop dashing around madly. It's to do with living in your own body, isn't it? Rather than flying off in distraction. So that's very, very similar to the spiritual practices of Christianity. There's the word hesychasm in Greek, which means literally quiet, but it really doesn't mean just not chatting. It means being still inside, still away from passions of egotism or hatred or anger or whatever. And that's a precursor to then seeing and hearing God.
Do you feel like prayer is a form of meditation?
Yeah, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the word meditation because when I'm with you, Dan, I don't meditate about you, I commune with you. So if meditation is understood as communion, then I think meditation is good. But to me, Christ is always present. So I don't need to meditate about Christ because he's with me. You know what I mean? I might meditate on a passage or what someone has said to me or look at an icon and meditate on it. But it's sort of at the same time, it's sort of thinking in the presence of God. So then even the meditation is, I don't know, you might be sitting with your wife and you're thinking about something, but I'm thinking about something in the presence of my wife, sort of thing. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it depends how one understands the word meditation.
I
Yeah.
suppose those terms in general are kind of loaded as they are. If you say either of those terms, I think everybody has a different view of exactly what they are. And that's a difficult thing to talk about. And there's such it seems to be maybe they both sort of point you to a kind of awareness.
Mm. But then you've got to ask awareness of what? What am
Yeah.
I? wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So that would be where Buddhism and Christianity would not necessarily depart, but certainly have a different culmination. Um, and what are you aware of? For me, it's the living God. Um, when I say God is personal, he's not a man with a beard sitting in, in heaven. But he's personal in the sense that he's a living God, and I can have a loving relationship with him. So that's what I want to become aware of, not just to some sort of fuzzy feeling of peace. The
and
peace
you
is
want to instill that into your work, and then that can sort of ripple outward, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's so important. It's such a, you can't really describe exactly what that is, but and to me, with art in general, it seems to be um it's a really, I was thinking about like it, you can't say exactly tangibly why it's important, but it is
Yeah.
this thing which helps other people. Like, why is it important to be a monk or to have a strong sort of spiritual practice? And somebody, a hardcore materialist, could say, "Oh, you're just navel gazing," But there is a real profound effect. You're happier. People around you are happier, and I think in your work you can do the same thing through art.
That is so true, Dan. I know with my own family, and if I'm more stressed out, then it's likely that I'm going to be snapping at my children or my wife. So I don't got to live with my disordered inner life, but when I'm at peace, I'm a lot nicer to live with. Yeah. But also historically, some of the most influential people have been people who found peace in their souls. There's a great Russian saint, Seraphim Sarov, who said, "Find peace, and 1,000 round you will be saved." It's a wonderful, well, true story of a stylite. A stylite is a type of ascetic who lives on a pillar. And there was a famous one sent, well, the number of them, so Simeon the stylite was one who lived on a stone pillar in Syria. And he was so wise, the emperor would go to visit him and get advice how to run his empire. I think, well, what does this creep know about running an empire? He's lived 30 years and not on a pillar. But he knew himself. He could see clearly. So when the emperor said, what shall I do with this or that? Because he was pure of heart, Simeon could see clearly. He didn't have to know all the political facts, but he could see, perhaps the emperor is getting a bit greedy, and that's why he's asked this question. So my answer will respond to that greed, or perhaps the emperor is very wise on this matter, and I can see that. So I'll say, yes, do what you're thinking of doing. So I think history has shown us that the people who waste time praying, the people who waste time finding peace, are actually the ones who have the most profound effect on the world. Gandhi's a good example. He overcame hate. Think this little silly man walking around half naked talking about peace. What a profound effect had he had. Whereas if he'd been running around like a politician and, you know, being hyperactive, but not from a place of peace, he wouldn't have done what he did.
Absolutely. It seems like there is a pretty direct proportion of also of renunciation and peace. And people don't want to hear that. I listen to Dharma talks from these Buddhist monks who talk about that. Like, one said that it would be a very, very, very bad billboard slogan, to renounce all the things you like. Like, nobody wants to hear that.
That's what we need to hear, though. Yeah,
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 but it's not. It seems to be you're not just renouncing things you like, but you're renouncing things that are not helpful too.
yeah. And I've often thought, why in the book of Genesis did God put the tree of knowledge of good and evil in Eden? So there's a tree of life and all these wonderful trees. And God says to Adam and Eve, eat whatever tree you want, except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So I always thought, well, isn't that a bit risky? Why did God put it there? But then I came across the writing of Ephraim the Syrian, I think it was, who said that we can understand that tree of knowledge of good and evil as creation, which is really good. But it depends how we respond to that good creation as to whether or not through it we gain knowledge of good or evil. So if you give me a gift, Dan, let's just say we're actually here in the presence and you come into my studio and you give me a gift. If I just take that gift from you and send you away, that becomes knowledge of the evil for me. You bought that gift as an expression of your friendship with me. And if I say, oh, thank you, Dan, it's really good, it's really kind of you, then it becomes knowledge of good. So exactly the same gift, and it becomes, to me, either good or bad, depending on how I respond to it. This is why I think the Eucharist, the service of thanksgiving, is central to the Christian way. So renunciation isn't just renouncing bad things, it's also renouncing the desire to grab things for themselves. And I think that's probably materialism. It's taking good stuff, but just taking it, grabbing it, and it doesn't have a face to it. As if Dan gives me a gift and I say thank you, it's got Dan written all over it. So if you give me a watch, every time I see that watch, I see Dan. At least if I grab that watch from Dan and tell him, go, Dan, I've got your watch, get lost now. Every time I see that watch, it's just a hunk of metal.
So
So
it's
I think
really,
renunciation is a very subtle thing, isn't it? It's not just renouncing bad things. It's an attitude of thankfulness for all the good things.
how it's used, right? You could have the
Hmm?
same how it's used,
Yeah, how it's
like a color or something. Like you can use a color poorly or well, depending on the context, on your knowledge, on your on where you are.
yeah.
Um,
Do you think therefore renunciation requires knowledge as well? It's not just carte blanche renouncing everything. It needs knowledge of context of how do I respond in this situation? And like, if you see someone being beaten up, anger is actually a good response then, not anger at the person, but the bad deed. If I didn't feel anger, I wouldn't do anything. I feel, oh, that guy's been beaten up, I'll keep on. No, if I feel anger about that bad deed, I can then with love, hopefully I can resolve that stress there. So knowledge is needed to know how to renounce the unhelpful emotion and tap into the good emotion in a given situation.
Absolutely. I think we should all be motivated more by love than fear, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I want to be sensitive to your time, but I just wanted to ask if you have any advice for young artists, or any just advice for people that are wanting to live a creative and happy life.
Thank you. Thank you. The word art means to join together. It comes from an ancient word, ars, which means to fitly join together. So my advice for a young artist is don't do it unless you want to be a servant of beauty and truth. In other words, to join together truth and goodness with the people who are going to see your art. Otherwise, you're just doing it for your own ego. And be ready for hard work. Someone might be gifted, but be ready for hard work. And if you're thinking of doing it as an occupation, only do it if it's like a drowning person needs air. You can't just do it. It's a nice idea, you're not going to do faint. You've got to do it because you have to do it. Like a drowning person is whatever, you're going to get that air. You've got to have that air, otherwise you're going to drown and die. Um, and for life in general, I think be thankful for the situation you're in. It might be a horrible situation. You might have to change what you do tomorrow. If you're being, I don't know, beaten up by your husband and being really badly treated, tomorrow you have to, deal with that situation and perhaps leave. But that the second, the minute you're in, you've got to find God there. You've got to find peace there. Um, so this idea of giving thanks in all circumstances to me is really important. We can't keep thinking, well, when I have this, when I have that, when I have that car, when I have those things, or when I find the right husband, then I'm going to be happy. You can't live in the future like that. You've got to find peace where you are. And that will give you wisdom to know what has to be changed and what is beyond our capacity to change and what we have to change. It will give you wisdom. That will give you peace where you are.
Love that. Beautiful. Thank you for that, and thank you for meeting today. Thank you for your work, your efforts, and putting good energy into the world. And let's talk again.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It's
Take
lovely to
care,
meet you.
Aiden. You too.